Welcome Math 1040 students. This is the first video in a two-part series on how to construct the frequency distribution as well as the histogram concerning the GPS buyer data set from page 61 of our textbook. Video 1 will only be concerned with the frequency distribution, and video 2 will be concerned only with the histogram construction. Remember, the histogram is the actual graph of the data. Okay, so in the frequency distribution portion in video 1, we're going to construct 9 columns of information, including the raw data, which is already listed here. The second column of information we'll use is we will sort the raw data. We will calculate the maximum and the minimum values. Okay, we will calculate the class width corresponding to a choice of k equals 7 classes. You can find that on page 61 of the book. Okay, and after the class width, we will calculate the lower and upper class limits. We will construct the classes or the intervals that the data will fall into themselves, and then we will calculate the frequency with which the data falls into the corresponding classes. So starting from the raw data, we want to create categories for those things mentioned. So we want the sorted data. Okay. Next, we want to calculate the maximum, the minimum, the class width, the lower class limits, the upper class limits, the classes themselves, and the corresponding frequencies. Okay, now remember, if any of these columns is too narrow, you can always double click on it and Excel will automatically make it wider so that it fits properly. To make our headings look nice, what we can do is we can click on the 1, so select everything in the first row, and we can just make sure everything is centered, okay, and then we can make sure everything is bold as well so it stands out nicely. Now the first column that we have to complete on our own is the sorted data, or column B. So what we will do is we will highlight all of the raw data entries from column A. Control C, we get the dancing ants that lets us know Excel has copied this information to the clipboard. We will click on cell B2 and then press Control V. That will paste all of the raw data into the new sorted data column. So we're now done with column A, so we don't want the dancing ants anymore. We press Escape, and you can see that's all that's left that's highlighted is everything in column B. Now to sort this data, we will come to the upper right. In the Home tab, we see a function called Sort and Filter. We would like to sort from smallest to largest. Okay, so we get a prompt that's asking us what is it that we actually want to sort. We actually only want to sort the current selection. So I'm clicking the second button here and sorting that way. All right, you can see that our data is then automatically put goes from smallest to largest, or in increasing order. Now, we want to calculate the maximum and the minimum values of our data set. So it's pretty easy to see here, now that the data is sorted, that the maximum will be 340. These units are in dollars, so this is US dollars, and the minimum will be 65. But we don't want to just type those numbers in ourselves. We want to use the built-in functions that Excel knows how to use to calculate those values. So the way that we do that, we click in cell C2, okay, and I'm going to type equals. And now I will type MAX, and you can see there's two choices, max or max A. Okay, we want to use max. So once that's highlighted, you press tab. And now Excel is asking, okay, what data am I taking the maximum over? All right, now there's a couple different ways to do this. You can either highlight all of the information or you can type things in manually. So I'll do it the highlight things way, and you can see we have a couple of things that are automatically put in for us. So we see B2, okay, so we're starting at B2. The colon represents, okay, go from B2 to some other point in the spreadsheet, all the way down to B31. Okay, so we want the maximum of this data. That's correct. So we're going to close our parentheses. So we see the function max has an opening parenthesis automatically. We're going to type Shift 0 to close the parenthesis, and then we'll hit enter, and we can see we get a value of 340 for the maximum, as we should. Now, to get the minimum, it's the same idea. I'm going to click cell D2, press equals. Now instead of max, I type min. Okay, again, a number of options, but the one we were interested in is MIN. Press tab, So instead of highlighting, this time I'll type it manually, but again, you could highlight and click on the data from the B column if you'd like. So I'll type it manually, so B2 colon B31, shift 0 to close the parenthesis, type enter, and you can see again we get the expected value of 65 for the minimum. Okay. Now next we want to calculate the class width corresponding to a choice. Okay, this choice is set forth for us on page 61 of the textbook to use seven different intervals or classes for our data. Okay, so the way that we do that, we had that formula. Okay, you can find it on page 60 of the textbook or from the class notes. It involved using the ceiling function and looking at the difference between the maximum and the minimum values. That was what we called the range. So the way that we do this, just like before, we type equals. So I click on cell E2, type equals. So I'm going to use the ceiling function. So it's the first one, ceiling.math. So that's highlighted. I press tab. Now it has its own starting parenthesis, but I'm actually going to include a second parenthesis because we need to make sure the order of operations are done correctly mathematically. So to get another opening parenthesis, we type shift 9. So you see we have two parentheses now, and we want to calculate the difference between the maximum and the minimum values. So we want to calculate C2, and you can see Excel highlights C2. It lets us know we're looking at the value 340. We want to subtract from that the minimum value, which is in cell D2. Okay, so that subtraction is done for us. Okay, close that inner set of parentheses, typing shift 0. And now we're going to divide by 7. So now that is completely done. We have the range divided by 7, and we're going to now type shift 0 to close the parentheses for the ceiling.math function. Once we do that, we can hit enter, and you can see for a data with the maximum and minimum of 340 and 65, if we'd like to use 7 classes, we must use a class width of 40. Okay. So the way that we now construct the lower class limits, so these are the smallest numbers in each of the intervals that we're going to construct here in our classes column, in column H eventually. The way that we do this is we can start with the smallest value, the minimum value, and then we will repeatedly add the class width to that value until we exceed or get a number larger than the maximum value in C2. Okay. So again, all of this can be found, this procedure can be found on page 60 of the textbook. So what I'd like to do, we want to start, the first lower class limit will be the minimum value. So all we're going to do is type equals D2. So we're going to take that value from cell D2 and hit enter. And you can see that that copies the value of 65 to the first lower class limit. Now we want to repeatedly add the value 40 to all the numbers that will be populated in this column here. So the way that we do that is as follows. We will write a formula. I'm going to click in cell F3, type equals. I want to take the previous value, so the value from F2, and add to that the class width. Okay, now I always want to add 40 to the numbers that will come in this column here. So since I always want to add the number 40, I always want to look at the cell E2. Remember, that's what the dollar signs in Excel do for you. They say always look at the cell that I'm pointing you to. Okay, so we type $E, $2. Okay, and Excel says, okay, I understand what you mean. I want to add what's in cell F2 with what's in cell E2, and I always want to reference cell E2 when I'm adding things up in the F column. So I press enter, and you can see 65 and 40 is 105 as it should be. Now what we will do is the lower right hand corner is a small green square. If you hover your cursor over that, it will become a small black cross. What we're going to do with the small black cross is click and then drag down, and it will automatically copy that formula. And so you can see what Excel does nicely for you. It says, okay, this next entry, what's in cell F4, must have been what's in F3 plus what was in E2. Okay, that's what the dollar signs do. It's saying always look at E2 when we add some value, when we add a number to what's in the F column. So 40 plus 105 is 145. 185, etc., as it should be. Now, we see that the numbers that we've generated eventually become larger than the maximum value in our data set. So because we don't need any of that extra information, we'll get rid of all of that. So the largest we need to go to is 305, right? 345 was the next value, and that exceeded 340, so we can stop there. Now the way that we construct the upper class limits, if my next interval starts at 105, that means the upper class limit for my first set of classes, my first interval of data, will be till 104. So I'm going to type, equals 104, press enter, so that locks in the value 104 into the column, into the entry G2. Now we're going to do the exact same thing to populate the entries in the G column. So we'll type equals, okay, G2 plus. Now I always want to add 40 to the entries in the G column, so I'm going to point Excel to always use the entry E2. So $E, $2, enter. You can see it added 40, and the nice thing is now again when we copy everything down, it knows to just keep adding 40 over and over and over again. Okay, and you can see we now have upper and lower class limits, okay, from 65 up to 344, which is good because our minimum data value is 65 and the maximum is 340. So every data point, whether you're looking at the raw data or the sorted data, will fall into one of these seven intervals. Okay, so the classes, there's not a really great way to do this other than manually, so I'm going to do this without an equal sign, because if you type equals and use a dash, which we will, Excel thinks you want a subtraction, which is not what we want. We just want these numbers as an interval. Okay, so I'm going to click on cell H2, and we're just going to type in the values from F2 and G2 and then proceed downwards. So we're going to take 65 through 104. Okay, next 105 through 144. Next 145 through 184. Next is 185 through 224. 225 through 264. 265 through 304, and 305 through 344. Okay, so these are our classes. These are the intervals that we're interested in lumping our data into. Okay, so we're almost done. All we need to do now is construct the frequency column for this data. Now the way that we do that is as follows. We're going to use what's called an array function in Excel. Okay, so Excel, we've seen that it can spit out numbers, so we can type things in and have it spit out or output a single number. Like in the case of maximum, we took a bunch of data and we had from all of that data, from those 30 data points, Excel outputted one single number. The same with the minimum, the same with the class width. Okay, we took two numbers, subtracted them, divided by 7, and had Excel give us one number. For the frequency, we want the frequency for all of these classes. Okay, so we don't want Excel to give us just one number. We'd like it to give us 7 different numbers listed properly. So that is what's called an array function. An array function will give us a list of things and not just one number. So the way that we do that is we will highlight starting from I2 down to I8. Okay, we will type equals. Now frequency is a built-in function to Excel, so we just start typing FRE. Okay, and we can see frequency comes up just like before. We will hit tab. Okay, so we can see the frequency function wants two things. It wants what's called a data array, and the second thing is called a bins array. So the data array just means what data do you want me to look at when I'm thinking about the frequency. Okay, so that is the data here. The raw or sorted data doesn't matter. We will use the sorted data. So I will highlight. You could type it in manual if you wanted. So B2 through B31. This is the data we're interested in taking the frequency of. So bins array, that means what categories or what classes do you want it to fall into. Okay, now don't worry too much about why this is the case. We're not actually going to use the H column. We're going to use the G column. Okay, so we're interested in that data, how the frequency occurs in these classes, and it just so happens we need to use the G column to make it work out right. Okay, now that we have that entered, we'll type Shift 0 to close the parentheses, and now instead of hitting enter if you are using an array function, you need to hit Control-Shift-Enter. By typing Control-Shift-Enter, that is what tells Excel we're using an array. We want a list of numbers, not just a single number. The other way you can tell Excel is understanding your input as an array instead of a single number. Notice here that the information in column I, the formula, by typing Control-Shift-Enter, Excel automatically put curly braces at the beginning and the end of our formula. We did not type that. Excel automatically did that when we hit Control-Shift-Enter. Compare that with the formulas that we used for single value outputs. Notice there are no curly braces here because Excel returned a single number. The same here, the same here. So that's one way you can tell the difference between an array output versus a single numerical value output. Now all we're going to do is just check real quick if these frequency values are appropriate for the corresponding classes. So for example, are there 6 values of data between 65 and 104 in our data? So we can count, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, the next value is 105, which is outside of that class, so the value of 6 looks good. Okay, we'll just do one more and I'll leave the rest for you to check on your own. So between 105 and 144, we should have 9 data values. So let's check that. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then you can see after the 9th entry, we get to 150, which does not fall in the class 105 to 144. So we can see that Excel has counted things correctly for us. Again, you can check the rest for yourself. This will conclude the frequency distribution portion of the 2-part video series. Please watch the second video in the series to learn how to take the information here and construct a histogram or a graph of the frequency distribution. Thank you for watching.